Long before Camilla entered the royal family, another woman stood dangerously close to the throne. She possessed beauty, influence, and a jewel given as proof of permanent devotion. But when the man who promised to protect her chose the crown instead, the brooch became evidence of everything she had lost. Her name was Lady Helena Ashcombe, the daughter of an old aristocratic family whose loyalty to the monarchy stretched back through generations. She had been raised to understand silence, duty, and the dangerous difference between being welcomed by royalty and truly belonging among them. Yet Helena was no ordinary guest. Behind palace doors, she became the trusted companion of a prince, expected one day to wear the crown. Their relationship was never announced. It did not need to be. Those closest to the royal household understood that Helena's influence ran deeper than friendship. She attended private dinners, listened as the prince confessed his fears, and stood beside him during bitter family disputes. He sought her judgment when advisors failed him. He trusted her when even his relatives seemed distant. And somewhere between those hidden conversations and carefully guarded meetings, Helena began to believe that she had been promised more than affection. She believed she had been promised a future. The Brooch appeared during the height of that devotion. At its center was a deep red stone allegedly removed from a dismantled royal necklace and reset especially for Helena. It was not simply valuable. It was intimate, unmistakable, and dangerously personal. Beneath the clasp, hidden from every curious eye, was an inscription promising that she would never be abandoned, no matter what duty, pressure, or succession demanded. But royal promises are often strongest before the crown begins to interfere. When the prince's future became a matter of national importance, Helena was no longer treated as a woman he loved. She became a problem to be solved. Advisors insisted that his bride must possess the correct bloodline, faith, and public reputation. Helena was suitable for private trust, but not for public power. The betrayal was swift and almost bloodless. Letters vanished. Invitations stopped. Portraits were quietly returned. People who had once leaned close to hear her opinion now passed her name in silence. The palace did not openly attack her. It did something colder. It erased her. Helena refused to surrender the brooch. She called it the last surviving proof that the future king's public loyalty had been built upon a private betrayal. For years, she kept it hidden. Then, on the eve of his coronation, she sent it back. With it came a sealed note addressed not to the king, but to every royal woman who might one day wear the jewel. Whatever Helena wrote was considered too dangerous for the ordinary collection. The brooch and the letter were locked together inside a private vault, away from official records and public memory. For decades, the jewel remained unseen, its inscription concealed and Helena's warning locked away. But after the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the brooch was reportedly brought out again and placed among the pieces offered to Camilla. The vault was opened quietly, without photographers, announcements, or public ceremony. Inside were jewels worn by queens, empresses, widows, and women who had survived the crown's coldest decisions. Camilla was expected to choose what would define her new position. Instead, one brooch stopped the entire selection process. After Camilla rose to the position of queen, the question of what she would wear became far more than a matter of taste. Senior aides began reviewing historic pieces that could be brought back into public life. But every choice carried risk. A necklace might recall a beloved queen. A tiara might revive an old rivalry. A brooch could suggest loyalty, grief, triumph, or something far more dangerous. In the royal collection, beauty was never separate from memory. Camilla could not simply select the brightest diamonds or the rarest stones. Each jewel had already belonged to someone. Each had been photographed during weddings, funerals, state visits, family crises, and moments the monarchy still struggled to explain. Wearing the wrong piece could reopen a wound. Refusing another could create questions the palace had no wish to answer. Then, the dark case was placed before her. It did not match the others. There was no polished catalog card, no neat summary of ownership, and no ceremonial history prepared for public use. Instead, the case carried an obsolete inventory code and a set of handwritten restrictions that appeared older than the filing system surrounding them. The Brooch inside was instantly striking, but the silence around it was more powerful than the jewel itself. Camilla asked why it had so rarely been photographed. No one answered at once. The pause was brief, but it exposed everything. Archivists lowered their eyes. Senior household staff exchanged careful looks. Finally, the sealed note linked to Lady Helena Ashcombe was mentioned. The original remained protected under private restrictions, but a later palace memorandum had summarized its warning in language designed to hide more than it revealed. The brooch, it said, was unsuitable for any royal woman whose marriage had resulted in another woman's public displacement or private suffering. Camilla's expression reportedly changed. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone to call it fear. But the warmth left her voice, and the room seemed to narrow around those words. She understood immediately what they echoed. Decades of judgment, headlines about betrayal, the long shadow of a marriage that had ended in pain. No one said Diana's name. They did not need to. An advisor tried to break the tension, dismissing the warning as an old superstition. Perhaps, he suggested, Camilla could reclaim the jewel, strip it of its darker meaning, and turn it into a symbol of survival. But Camilla asked only one question. Had the brooch ever been offered to Queen Elizabeth II? The answer was yes, and the late Queen had also refused to wear it publicly. That changed everything. Camilla no longer treated the case as a curiosity. She requested the complete private file, the inscription beneath the clasp, and the full text of Helena's final message. What Camilla discovered in that file was not a ghost story, a curse, or an old servant's superstition. It was something far more threatening, a direct warning about women who inherit power through another woman's pain. The truth was hidden beneath the clasp, where no camera could ever capture it. The brooch did not curse the woman who wore it, it exposed her. And for Camilla, wearing it would invite the world to compare two royal love stories built generations apart, but ending with the same wounded question. The private file gave Camilla the answer she had feared. The brooch had not been hidden because it was believed to bring death, illness, or disaster. Its danger was far more human. It belonged to the memory of a woman who had become emotionally essential to a future king, while another woman was chosen, protected, and presented to the nation. Helena had been loved in private, denied in public, and then erased so the crown could move forward without admitting what it had destroyed. That history cut too close. Beneath the clasp, the full inscription was finally revealed. What is taken in silence is remembered in stone. The words turned the jewel into something more than an ornament. They made it an accusation. Helena's sealed message went even further. She warned that the brooch should never be worn as a symbol of victory by a woman who reached the crown after another woman's suffering. For Camilla, the meaning was impossible to escape. The moment she wore it, the world would see Diana. Every newspaper would reopen the old questions. Who had been loved? Who had been sacrificed? Who had survived? And could decades of royal duty ever erase the pain attached to the path that brought Camilla to the throne? Her fear was not supernatural. It was personal, psychological, and brutally public. The brooch would give critics a perfect symbol through which to retell her entire life. One photograph would last forever. Some would claim she was acknowledging Diana. Others would accuse her of defying Diana's memory. Still others would say she was presenting herself as the woman who had endured the scandal and ultimately won. Even the red stone would work against her. To some, it would represent passion. To others, blood, sacrifice, or stolen love. No palace statement could control those meanings once the image entered public history. Camilla reportedly made her decision without ceremony. The Brooch was to be removed from all future public jewelry proposals. It would not be destroyed. It would not be returned. It would simply disappear from consideration. Yet the choice was not as cold as it seemed. Part of Camilla may have recognized herself in Helena, a woman privately valued but publicly judged, trapped between affection and institution. But that connection made the jewel more dangerous, not less. Wearing it could appear less like sympathy and more like triumph. And that may have been the deepest fear of all. As queen, Camilla wearing the brooch could look like a declaration that the woman once condemned had outlasted every obstacle and claimed the final prize. Her refusal may have been self-protection. It may also have contained guilt, restraint, or the quiet understanding that some wounds should never be worn as decoration. But inside the palace, not everyone agreed. Some believed that by refusing the brooch, Camilla had made it even more powerful. Camilla had made her choice, but the brooch remained inside the royal collection, waiting in darkness. And soon, a far more dangerous question emerged. If she would never wear it, who was the palace preserving it for? Royal jewels do not simply disappear when one woman refuses them. They wait for another wearer, another reign, and another interpretation. Behind closed doors, the brooch became the center of a quiet struggle because whoever inherited it could control the story Camilla had spent years trying to silence. The argument began with a question that sounded simple but was anything but. Who truly owned the brooch? Royal jewels are rarely personal possessions in the ordinary sense. Some belong to the monarch. Others remain within family trusts, private collections, or arrangements understood only by a few advisors and archivists. A queen may wear a jewel, guard it, or lend it, yet still lack the power to decide its final fate. That uncertainty turned the brooch into a political problem. Some believed it should remain sealed forever. Others argued that it belonged in a museum, safely removed from living royal conflict. A more extreme group wanted it dismantled, its red stone reset, and its history buried beneath a new design. But another suggestion carried far greater consequences. The brooch could eventually be offered to a younger royal woman. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was the most obvious possibility. Her supporters believed she could transform the meaning of the jewel. In Catherine's hands, they argued, it might no longer represent romantic betrayal. It could become a symbol of endurance, responsibility, and the strength of women who survived the demands of royal life. Yet that idea did not erase the danger. It sharpened it. If Catherine wore the brooch, the contrast would be immediate. She represented the monarchy's future, while Camilla remained tied to one of its most painful emotional scandals. Photographs would invite comparison. Headlines would claim Catherine had accepted the warning Camilla was too afraid to face. The jewel would no longer be hidden, and Camilla would lose control of the story completely. Another theory pushed the decision further into the future. Perhaps the brooch was being preserved for Princess Charlotte once she reached adulthood. By then, the jewel might be separated from those directly connected to Charles, Diana, and Camilla. But time would not weaken its meaning. It might make it stronger, turning Helena's warning into a message passed from one royal woman to the next. The sealed letter created an even deeper conflict. Some family members allegedly wanted it destroyed before its contents could leak. Royal archivists resisted. Remove the letter, they warned, and the brooch would become a false object, stripped of the pain that gave it meaning. Even dismantling the jewel offered no clean escape. The hidden inscription lay beneath the clasp, and altering the brooch risked damaging the words forever. Any attempt to change it could look less like preservation and more like deliberate erasure. Camilla was trapped between two dangers: Leave the Brooch untouched, and the accusation survived. Destroy or alter it, and she might appear terrified of what it revealed. Then, the rumors began. Details reached journalists, jewelry historians, and royal commentators. Not enough to confirm everything, but enough to make the silence suspicious. And the leak, some believed, had not come from an enemy beyond the palace gates. It came from someone inside, someone convinced that Helena's warning had been hidden long enough. Once the first whispers escaped the vault, the palace could no longer control where the story traveled. Old photographs were examined, private inventories were compared, and one forgotten image threatened to prove that Camilla had encountered the brooch years earlier. The photograph had remained unnoticed for years. Camilla was not wearing the brooch, but it was there resting inside an open case during a private royal exhibition. Her expression appeared calm to everyone else. To those who knew the jewel's history, it looked like recognition. The image had been taken long before Camilla became queen, during a private review of historic royal jewelry. At first, there seemed to be nothing unusual about it. Several important pieces had been arranged for examination, each connected to a former queen, a royal marriage, or a moment of national importance. Camilla stood nearby, composed and attentive. But at the edge of the photograph sat a dark presentation case, and inside it was the unmistakable red stone of Helena's brooch. That single detail threatened the palace's carefully controlled version of events. Until then, the quiet suggestion had been that Camilla first learned the full story after Queen Elizabeth II's death, when the brooch was brought from the vault and placed among the jewels considered for her new role. The photograph suggested otherwise. Camilla may have known about it for years. Her refusal was not sudden. It may have been a private decision made long before she wore a crown. The original caption made the mystery deeper. It identified several necklaces, brooches, and ceremonial pieces by name, yet made no mention of the red jewel despite its clear position in the case. Later archive copies appeared even more suspicious. In some, the edge of the image had been cropped, removing the brooch completely. Was it an ordinary editorial choice, or an attempt to erase evidence of an earlier encounter? Claims soon emerged that Queen Elizabeth II had personally explained Helena's story to Camilla. According to those whispers, the late queen advised her never to wear the brooch during her lifetime, but the meaning of that warning remained uncertain. Elizabeth may have been protecting Camilla from a public storm, or she may have been reminding her that acceptance inside the royal family did not erase the suffering attached to her past. The jewel may have become a silent test between the two women. By refusing it, Camilla demonstrated restraint, obedience, and perhaps an awareness of the emotional price of her position. For decades, she had worked to become useful to the monarchy without openly demanding that the public forget Diana. The brooch threatened that careful balance. The photograph also revived questions about other historic jewels Camilla rarely wore. Were some avoided because of Diana? Were others connected to royal women whose stories remained too painful to revive? Palace officials refused to discuss private jewelry decisions. Their silence, intended to end the speculation, only made it stronger. They did not confirm the photograph's meaning, but they did not deny it either. Then archivists uncovered something more troubling. Helena's letter contained a second instruction, one absent from the memorandum Camilla had first been shown. The first warning explained why the brooch should not be worn. The second explained when it must be revealed, and it pointed toward a moment of royal transition the palace could not postpone forever. Helena did not ask for revenge. She asked for remembrance. Her final instruction declared that the brooch should remain hidden until a royal woman was powerful enough to wear it without celebrating another woman's defeat. That single sentence transformed the jewel's future and placed Camilla at the center of an impossible test. The complete letter revealed that Helena had never intended the Brooch to vanish forever. She did not want it destroyed, dismantled, or buried so deeply that her name disappeared with it. Instead, she demanded that any future wearer acknowledge the woman whose suffering had been erased from the jewel's official history. The Brooch could only be reclaimed through truth. It was not to be worn as proof that love had conquered duty, or that one woman had triumphed over another. It was to be treated as a memorial to women silenced by royal expectation, women whose pain had been hidden so the monarchy could continue without admitting the emotional cost of its decisions. For Camilla, that condition was almost impossible. To wear the jewel honestly, she would have to speak about betrayal, hidden relationships, displaced wives, and the crown's instinct to protect the institution before the people trapped inside it. Even if she never mentioned Diana, the world would hear Diana's name in every sentence. Every word would be examined. Was Camilla apologizing? Was she defending herself? Was she asking for forgiveness, or trying to place her own suffering beside that of the woman whose marriage had collapsed? There were whispers that Camilla once considered wearing the brooch at a remembrance event. Carefully written remarks were reportedly prepared, speaking of royal women who had endured judgment, loneliness, and silence. But the plan was abandoned before it could move beyond private discussion. The risks were too great. Some advisors feared the gesture would look like an apology forced through symbolism. Others warned that it could be seen as appropriation, with Camilla using Helena's tragedy to soften the public memory of Diana. And some believed that placing both women inside the same emotional story would not heal the past. It would ignite it again. That left Camilla trapped between silence and confession. Silence protected the crown, but it also preserved the accusation attached to the brooch. Speaking might reveal humanity, regret, and restraint, yet it could reopen wounds the monarchy had spent decades trying to contain. Helena's final instruction gave the jewel moral power. It could not be worn safely for beauty, status, or triumph. It demanded vulnerability. It required its wearer to admit that royal survival often comes at someone else's expense. Perhaps Catherine could one day fulfill that condition. She was not personally tied to the old conflict, but even her choice would carry consequences. The Brooch would still ask whether the monarchy could face emotional damage without being crushed by its own history. And that was the truth Camilla could not escape. Her refusal exposed the limits of royal power. A queen could command a household, open a vault, and control a ceremony, but she could not command what the public would see in a single stone. As preparations began for another major state occasion, the Brooch was reportedly considered once more. And once more, it was removed. The Brooch never appeared beneath the palace lights, yet its absence spoke louder than any diamond. And in the silence surrounding it, the monarchy revealed the one inheritance it has never learned how to control: memory. Camilla can refuse the brooch, lock it inside a vault, and remove its name from every public list. But she cannot erase what it represents. The jewel has become more powerful in darkness, because every time she avoids it, the same question returns. What is she afraid the world will remember? The answer has never rested in the diamonds, the age of the setting, or the strange warnings attached to the stone. Its power comes from the story. A story of love hidden behind duty. Of one woman welcomed in private and denied in public. Of another woman whose pain became part of the price of royal survival. The Brooch carries no magic. It carries memory, and memory is far more difficult to control. That is why Camilla's refusal cannot be dismissed as simple fear. It may contain guilt. It may reflect caution, respect for Diana's legacy, or an understanding that certain symbols cannot be softened by good intentions. Perhaps she knows that wearing it would not reclaim the past. It would summon it. The monarchy has always depended on appearances. It chooses the balcony, the procession, the jewels, and the carefully measured words. But this brooch exposes the weakness inside that control. Its absence has become evidence. Every time Camilla appears in a historic piece, observers ask why she chose it. And every time the red brooch remains hidden, they ask what stopped her. The contrast is brutal. Camilla has the title. She has access to the vault. She has the authority to approve ceremonies and carry the symbols of queenship. Yet one small jewel remains beyond her control. Because the moment she wears it, its meaning will no longer belong to her. Helena, the woman the palace tried to erase, has achieved a kind of permanence. Her name survived through the very object meant to close the chapter on her suffering. And now, Diana's memory has given the brooch another layer. Two women from different generations have become tied together by the same royal conflict, private love set against public duty, with emotional damage hidden beneath ceremony. The jewel may remain unworn throughout Camilla's lifetime. It may pass forward, waiting for Catherine, Charlotte, or another royal woman not yet at the center of power. But the question will follow it. Will that future wearer obey Helena's condition? Will she reveal the truth and turn the brooch from an accusation into an acknowledgement? Such a moment would force the monarchy to admit what its collections often conceal. Royal jewels do not only celebrate victories, marriages, and reigns. They can preserve the suffering women were ordered to carry in silence. Camilla avoids the brooch because one photograph could become a verdict. No statement could explain it. No palace advisor could soften it. Once the image entered history, the world would decide what it meant. So the brooch remains sealed, waiting not for the most powerful woman, but for the first one willing to tell the whole truth. And until that woman opens the case, the brooch will remain exactly where the monarchy fears it most, not on a queen's coat, but inside the public imagination.